So let's quickly go over the vocab terms from last week, especially because there is some stuff from last week that I really kind of want to lean into a little bit today. Remember, you're going to complete your last vocab quiz on Midnight's Children. Actually, no, because they're going to be, never mind, we're finishing this next week. So, yeah, complete the vocab quiz that'll go up on Friday morning by Sunday. And for Monday, just finish Midnight's Children. Right? There's about another 65 pages or so to go.
Okay.
So we're almost at the end of this. And then A Small Place is much shorter and a lot easier to read.
It's like 100 something pages.
Yeah. All right, so who is Emil Zagallo?
He pretends to be something he's not. So he's Salim's history teacher? Yep.
Geography, he's his geography teacher, yep.
And he has Ascadoros, not remember the word. He has something in there that's like in his room that shows strength.
Yeah,
Conquistador.
Yes, good. Yes, he has a picture of a conquistador.
Yes.
That he uses as like his symbol of civilization, right? Like that civilization to him is a conquering European on a horse.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He claims to be Peruvian, even though his students know that he's almost certainly not. And he's the guy who tears out Salim's hair as well. Okay. Maya. Do you remember what Maya was?
Maya is a veil of illusion that keeps us from glimpsing from the truth.
Yes.
And I put in parentheses, Brahman, Brahman.
Yes, Brahman is the opposite of Maya. And do you remember what Brahman is?
No.
Okay, so Brahman is truth or absolute reality, right? So it's the reality that lies underneath Maya. And these are both terms in Hindu philosophy. All right, the Midnight's Children Conference.
It is a conference for children who are born at the first hour. And Salim's power only works in India and not in else like Pakistan and somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And there's a total of 10,000 people, I think.
No, it's I forget the exact. It's 500 something, and it's the same number as were in the Indian Parliament, right?
Yeah.
And they are all from different regions and different social classes, right? So, like the new country, this Midnight's Children's Conference is built out of heterogeneous materials, right? People, they speak different languages, they have different, regional, ethnic, class identities, and very different powers as well, right? Some of them, their powers don't seem to be particularly useful at all. Others, like Salim, have powers like telepathy, or, can perform actual magic, right? One girl can fly. And one thing I think should be noted here is that the name Midnight's Children Conference sort of mirrors the name All India Congress, which up until relatively recently was the primary political party, or the dominant political party in India. It's a sort of center-left party. They had been in control most of the country most of the time since 1947, and they've been traditionally run by the Nehru-Gandhi family. So Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. And then his daughter, Indira Gandhi, later becomes leader of the All India Congress, and eventually Prime Minister. She'll pop up at the end in the last 60 pages or so of the novel. And now her, I think, grandson, Rahul, I think, is the current leader of the party. And he actually just got ejected from the Lok Sabha using a new law that the current Prime Minister is able it was invoked in order to basically disqualify people who criticized him from serving in government. So that's a little scary. Yeah. All right. Now, what about these two? The Samyukta Maharashtra Samiti and the Maha Gujarat Parishad. Do you remember what these are?
I know that what I have in my notes, it is an official language. That's about it. And I know that in the story that they was at a war because of the different, like, how one speaks. And Salim like said he's like a part of something that just happened, like a war between them.
Yeah. He claims that he started, that he basically started a riot, right? That these two groups participated in, where they fell into combat with each other. But these are two groups that both wanted the old state of Bombay divided along linguistic lines.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, the Samyukta Maharashtra Samiti wanted a Marathi-speaking state, and the Maha Gujarat Parishad wanted a Gujarati-speaking state. And this is just it's emblematic of what Salim sees as the kind of cracking up of the country of his birth and the country that he feels kind of tied to by the moment of his birth, right? All of this partitioning and splitting and breaking apart. Okay, we talked about Brahman, but this actually, I think, is a good place to bring us back to Rushdie's view of English in India. What he thinks the use of English is in India.
I don't know that one. That was like the one question on
Yeah.
that paragraph that I skipped because I don't remember that in the lecture.
Okay, so this is do you remember? I gave you that short piece from outside the novel to read.
Yes.
We went over it together in class. So Rushdie's basic idea of Rushdie is not anti-English, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least not anti-English language. Rushdie argues that English is actually an essential language in India because you've got a polyglot country with so many different regional languages, many of which have like regional and ethnic rivalries attached to them, right? Mm-hmm. Like we see with the Marathi movement and the Gujarati movement here. So he argues that English is a language that different groups can use to communicate that no one hates and that no one feels the government is imposing on them. Mm-hmm. Right? As would be the case, say, for example, if Hindi, which is mostly spoken in the north, were imposed on non-Hindi speakers in the south, right? You know, the non-Hindi speakers in the south would feel like the government is trying to force them to conform to something they don't want to conform to. Mm-hmm. And this is similar to Salim's power of telepathy, right? Mm-hmm. So Salim's power of telepathy allows the other Midnight's children to communicate despite the fact that they all come from different regions and speak different languages. All right. The Lok Sabha. And think about this again in terms of the Midnight Children's Conference. Do you remember what the Lok Sabha is?
That's what I was looking at. We said it was like the same number or something, but
yeah,
that's about it.
Same number as are in the Midnight Children Conference. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the Lok Sabha is the lower house of the Indian Parliament. So the house that's run by the Prime Minister that actually generates most legislation. All right, Evie Burns. Who's Evie Burns?
Salim's crush. She was
Yes.
mean. He learned to ride the bike just because he wanted to get closer to her.
It's another one of those indirect kisses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
where's she from?
I cannot remember.
She's an American.
Okay.
Yeah, which makes her exotic to him, right? And he reaches into her mind,
Yeah.
right? And he pulls out that disturbing memory which suggests that she might have killed her mother.
Yeah, and she knew that he looked into her mind because when he did mention
Yeah.
that when he looked at somebody else's mind, they know that they're
Yeah,
he's
or
intruded.
at least if he goes deep enough,
Yeah. So,
if he's not careful, yeah. So yeah, she detects him, and then goes back to America and knifes an old lady.
she was a troubled child.
Clearly, yes. And finally, who or what is the brass monkey?
Celine's sister,
Mhm.
who's, I'm gonna consider her a pyromaniac because she likes to burn people's foot, like burn their shoes while they're still wearing them.
Yeah.
So pyromaniac.
And this seems to be a reference too to that Ravana terrorist group that burned Ahmed Sinai's leather warehouse, right?
Mhm. What's another thing? Another name is Jamila something.
Yes, her actual name is Jamila.
Yeah.
And monkeys are in folklore to these kind of trickster figures, right?
Yeah, aggressive. She wanted to protect her brother from Evie, basically.
Uh-huh.
It's like, oh, she didn't like you or something like this. Go do this
Uh-huh.
and this. She was gonna do anything for her brother.
Yeah.
And then
But she also rejects all love, right?
she rejects everything.
And yeah, she has her friends beat up Sonny Ibrahim and take all of his clothes off because he confesses his love to her. Yeah, just because he likes her. Yeah.
Chop chop.
Yeah. And yeah, boy, she seems to try to misbehave to get the attention that apparently goes mostly to her brother, right? Okay, cool. So, for today, I really kind of want to lean into this idea of Maya and Brahman and how it relates to the magic realism that we talked about when we started discussing this novel. So, do you remember what magic realism is?
Not from the top of my head, but I have those in the.
Okay.
If I can find my own notes. I know we just talked about it not too long ago. It's a fantasy adjacent, which has realistic setting styles plus fantastic elements, dry realistic, and which is surprisingly weird in their use of allegory and social commentary and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's all the basics there, right? So yeah, what we're dealing with magic realism, is essentially a realist novel set in the real world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a real world setting. Where supernatural events occur and are related kind of dryly or matter-of-factly. Right, as though there's nothing particularly out of the ordinary about them.
Mm-hmm.
This is often used as a form of social commentary. It's especially common in what we call postcolonial literatures.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to quote here from something a scholar by the name of Homi Bhabha wrote in the 1990s. Right? He said that magic realism is the language of the emergent post-colonial nation. And let me explain what he means by this, right? So, the old Western-dominated way of looking at the colonized East is referred to by the scholar Edward Said and by others as Orientalism. Now, have we introduced this term before? Have we discussed this before?
We have towards the beginning of the semester.
Okay, yeah, I think that, yeah, that this is pretty foundational stuff, so I think we probably went over this, but it probably wouldn't hurt to go over it again, right? So, Orientalism, the way the term was traditionally used, simply referred to the study of Asia and Asian histories, Asian languages, Asian cultures in a European context, right? Mm-hmm. So what Said argues is that Orientalism is an attempt by the West to define the East and to control and contain and tame the East by defining it, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the means by which this is done is by projecting characteristics that the West does not want to see itself onto the East, right? So, for example, if the Westerner wants to see himself as industrious, then the Easterner must be lazy. If the Westerner wants to see himself as chaste, then the Easterner must be promiscuous. And if the Westerner is rational, logical, then the Easterner is superstitious. So what magic realism tries to do is explode this East-West binary by putting these superstitious elements, these magical fantasy elements, into a straightforward, realist, rational narrative. Thus kind of like critiquing the idea of Western-imposed rationalism by adopting it in a superficial sense, right? And by showing the ways in which superstitious occurrences, magical occurrences, can still fit into a supposedly rational system. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the ways this is often done is by constructing these kind of macro and micro timelines, right? So on the one hand, you've got the history of a nation, but you've also got kind of parallel to that, as we have in this novel, the history of an individual or a family, right? Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel, 100 Years of Solitude, is structured in a very similar way. Mm-hmm. So we can list out a number of different historical events here, like things we can confirm have happened. Mm-hmm. There's the 1947 partition of India, right? There's the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, right? We have the freeze, in which the assets of Muslim businessmen are frozen. Mm-hmm. We have Indian and Pakistani elections. Right, that we can confirm happened, and yes, this is who won, and so on and so forth. We have Ayub Khan's military coup. In, I believe, 1959, right? This is when Salim is moving the pepper pots around his uncle's table. Mm-hmm. We have the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. And then at the end of the portion that we read for today, we have the Pakistani Civil War. in 1970, in which there are two verified historical events. One is the massacre by the West Pakistani army of intellectuals in East Pakistan, and India's invasion of East Pakistan, which then declares its independence and becomes Bangladesh, right? So from 1971, there is no longer there's no longer a West and East Pakistan, right? East Pakistan becomes an independent republic called Bangladesh. But alongside all of this, right, we have these various events in Salim's personal history, many of which don't match up to the official narratives, right?
He's unreliable.
Yeah, or Salim might be the unreliable narrator, but it's also suggested that maybe history is the way history is communicated to us is unreliable, right? So I think that there, you may notice, for example, in several of these chapters when things that governments would later deny are happening. The way Salim tends to write them is in the form of questions. Right? He writes a lot more questions than would be normal in this kind of narrative. And I'm just trying to find a good example of this. So, like on page 14, there's a whole page 444. There's a whole paragraph of questions, right? But there are cracks and gaps, and these are all in Salim's personal history, right? Had I by then begun to see that my love for Jamila Singer had been, in a sense, a mistake? Had I already understood how I had simply transferred onto her shoulders the adoration which I now perceived to be a vaulting, all-encompassing love of country? When was it that I realized that my truly incestuous feelings were for my true birth sister, India herself, and not for that trollop of a crooner who had so callously shed me like a used snakeskin and dropped me into the metaphorical wastebasket of army life? When? Admitting defeat, I am forced to record that I cannot remember for sure. So here he's questioning his own personal history, but at various points he also questions official narratives here. So, like for example, like during the, he's witnessing the massacre in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and so he's questioning what it is he sees. Because this is not what the official narrative says happened. When he's with his the three other members of his Pakistani army unit in the jungle in the Sundarbans, right? All of these things happen that they're really not sure, what's real and what isn't. But the official history always denies the things that Salim says happened, right? In the official history, no, there's no massacre of intellectuals, right? In the official history, like there's a good example of this when it's talking about the Indo-Pakistani War, right? So the official record says that this is a conflict about border outposts, and control of a region called the Ran of Kutch. But what does Salim say is the real reason for the Indo-Pakistani War? Well, think about it. Apart from Salim, who doesn't come out of it alive?
His parents.
His parents, his cousin Zafar, his grandmother, his Aunt Pia, his uncle Zulfikar, and his aunt Emerald, right? Pretty much all the members of his family are killed, except for his uncle Mustafa, who's an Indian civil servant, right? But yeah, the whole family that's in Pakistan is killed. So he argues that, well, again, with the exception of Jamila as well. Jamila also survives. But yeah, on the whole, like, so he argues that the purpose of the Indo-Pakistani War was actually to kill his family off. And in terms of this whole idea of Maya, right? This veil of illusion that covers the absolute truth, I want to point to the events in the life of Salim's unfortunate cousin Zafar. So first off, like, what's Zafar's problem? What is the thing that Zafar unfortunately cannot control?
His addiction?
It's not an addiction. He can't control his bladder, right?
Yeah.
Zafar is the General Zulfikar's son who can't stop pissing his pants, right? And is, kind of embarrassment to his father as a result, right? And Zafar's lack of bladder control is a kind of metaphor for Salim's inability to control his sexual appetites at the same time, right? So the idea of being in Pakistan, the land of the pure, right, is supposed to be ironic. But let's see, where is the bit? Okay. So, page 384. Right. The mystery of the deserted border posts did not at first seem like a puzzle to the young Pakistani soldiers who were required to occupy them until new border guards were sent. My cousin, Lieutenant Zafar, found his bladder and bowels voiding themselves with hysterical frequency for the 7 nights he spent occupying one of the posts with only 5 Jawans for company. During nights filled with the shrieks of witches and the nameless slithery shufflings of the dark, the 6 youngsters were reduced to so abject a state that nobody laughed at my cousin anymore. They were all too busy wetting their own pants. One of the Jawans whispered in terror during the ghostly evil of their last but one night, "Listen, boys, if I had to sit here for a living, I'd bloody well run away too." In a state of utter jelly-like breakdown, the soldiers sweated in the ram. And then, on the last night their worst fears came true, they saw an army of ghosts coming out of the darkness towards them. They were in the border post near the nearest the seashore, and in the greeny moonlight they could see the sails of the ghost ships, of phantom dhows, and the ghost army approached, relentlessly. Despite the screams of the soldiers, specters bearing moss-covered chests and strange shrouded litters piled high with unseen things. And when the ghost army came in through the door, my cousin Zafar fell at their feet and began to gibber horribly. The first phantom to enter the outpost had several missing teeth and a curved knife stuck in his belt. When he saw the soldiers in the hut, his eyes blazed with vermilion fury. "God's pity," the ghost chieftain said. "What are you mother sleepers here for? Didn't you all get properly paid off?" Not ghosts, smugglers. The 6 young soldiers found themselves in absurd postures of abject terror, and although they tried to redeem themselves, their shame was engulfingly complete. And now we come to it. In whose name were the smugglers operating? Whose name fell from the lips of the smuggler chief and made my cousin's eyes open in horror? Whose fortune, built originally on the miseries of fleeing Hindu families in 1947, was now augmented by these spring and summer smugglers' convoys through the unguarded Rand and thence into the cities of Pakistan? which punch-faced general, with a voice as thin as a razor blade, commanded the phantom troops. So Zafar here is terrified by smugglers who are operating under the commands of his own father, right?
That was mean.
Yeah.
A mean prank.
Well, but Zafar's not supposed to be there, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is that nobody's supposed to be there because the smugglers have paid off the army.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the border posts that they're fighting over in the war are abandoned in the first place, right? Because Zulfikar has paid people off to try to get the smugglers through, to enrich himself.
Mm-hmm.
So this illusion, one, of ghostly smugglers, and two, of a conflict with India over the border, right, is all because one greedy general is on the take, right? The smugglers have paid him off to abandon these posts. So all of these kind of like bigger world events cover up smaller and grubbier corruption, right? And this is what, like this plus a lifetime of abuse at his father's hands are what leads Zafar to go into his father's bathroom and slit his throat, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like this final humiliation just pushes him over the edge.
It reminds me of a TV show called 13 Reasons Why. And she had like 13 tapes on why, and on each tape there was 13 people on the tape.
Yeah.
So there was a reason why she killed herself, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is like once the truth is revealed, right? Once that absolute reality is revealed after the veil is pulled away, right? Zafar can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much, and he has to do something about it. So the other kind of related thing that I think all this is connected to is a tendency to relate processes of modernization with Westernization and authoritarianism. Right? So usually we tend to think of the West or Western nations as democratic nations, right?
Mm-hmm.
That these are places where people select their own leaders, where we have particular rights and freedoms. But in Rushdie's version here, right, the places, like the attempts to make India and Pakistan more Western, or their attempt to ally themselves with Western powers, tend to lead their authorities to behave in more oppressive ways. So, like, for example, we have this guy who is referred to in the novel only as the Nawab of Keef. Right, whose son Mutasim falls in love with Jamila Singer. And the first thing we're told about this guy first in the story, like in the nature of a kind of fairy tale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Page 366. Once upon a time, in the far northern princedom of Kif, there lived a prince who had two beautiful daughters, a son of equally remarkable good looks, a brand new Rolls-Royce motor car, and excellent political contacts. This prince, or Nawab, believed passionately in progress, which was why he had arranged the engagement of his elder daughter to the son of the prosperous and well-known General Zulfikar. For his younger daughter, he had high hopes of a match with the son of the president himself. As for his motor car, the first ever seen in his mountain range valley, he loved it almost as much as his children. It grieved him that his subjects, who had become used to using the roads of Kif for purposes of social intercourse, quarrels, and games of hit the spittoon, refused to get out of its way. He issued a proclamation explaining that the car represented the future and must be allowed to pass. The people ignored the notice, although it was pasted to shop fronts and walls, and even, it is said, to the sides of cows. The second notice was more peremptory, ordering the citizens to clear the highways when they heard the horn of the car. The Kifis, however, continued to smoke and spit and argue in the streets. The third notice, which was adorned with a gory drawing, said that the car would henceforth run down anybody who failed to obey its horn. The Kifis added new, more scandalous pictures to the one on the poster. And then the Nawab, who was a good man but not one of infinite patience, actually did as he threatened. When the famous singer Jamila arrived with her family and impresario to sing at her cousin's engagement ceremony, the car drove her without trouble from board of the palace, and the Nawab said proudly, "No trouble, the car is respected now. Progress has occurred." Now, how has progress occurred here? Right. What is the Nawab's idea of progress? Well, try to connect it to the idea of the car, right?
Advancement?
What's that?
Advancement?
Like, what kind of advancement specifically? Does anyone else in KIF appear to have a car? Or even know what the hell this thing is?
No. Only people with money.
Yeah, the Nawab has the only car in the valley, right? And yeah, I think that he connects progress and the future with machines, right? Particularly with fast-moving machines. And what is this machine, like, what's the basic problem that he encounters with his car?
He doesn't know how to drive it?
Well, is it that he doesn't know how to drive it? What does he want the people to do in respect to his car, right? What are the people used to doing in the roads?
Just staying in there.
Yeah.
So he wants people to move out the way while he's driving.
Yeah, he expects people to get out of the way for his car, right? He doesn't want the people in his way when he's trying to get places quickly. Never mind that they've always used the roads this way, right? No one has ever before tried to bar them from socializing in the road. Which, I mean, why wouldn't they?
And so, do that now.
Yeah. And so, what's his response to people refusing to, people just going on as they always have and not getting out of the way of his car?
He hit them.
Yeah, he just runs them over, right?
I was kidding.
No, this is the implication, yeah, that of the Nawab's conversation here, right? No, when they won't get out of his way, he says, "Fine, I'm just going to run you over."
So mean.
Yeah. But this, to him, is what progress is, right? Progress is, I get my way, I get to impose the things I want onto my subjects, right? And what he wants is fast-moving machines. And he doesn't really care if other people are hurt or killed if he gets his way. Now, this is then kind of, this goes a little further. There's a story of the story of this election that happens shortly thereafter, right? He's got guests from the opposition party staying with him for his daughter's engagement. On page 372, right, the next morning, the two badmashes of the combined opposition party awoke to find themselves back in their own beds. But when they had dressed, they opened the door of their chamber to find two of the biggest soldiers in Pakistan outside it, standing peacefully with crossed rifles, barring the exit. The badmashes shouted and wheedled, But the soldiers stayed in position until the polls were closed. Then they quietly disappeared. The Badmashes sought out the Nawab, finding him in his exceptional rose garden. They waved their arms and raised their voices. Travesty of justice was mentioned, and electoral jiggery-pokery, also chicanery. But the Nawab showed them 13 new varieties of Keefe rose, crossbred by himself. So science, right? They ranted on, death of democracy, autocratic tyranny, until he smiled gently, and said, "My friends, yesterday my daughter was betrothed to Zafar Zulfikar. Soon, I hope, my other girl will wed our president's own dear son. Think then, what dishonor for me, what scandal on my name, if even one vote were cast in Keefe against my future relative. Friends, I am a man to whom honor is of concern. So stay at my house, eat, drink, only do not ask for what I cannot give." So, why are these two guys so mad? Like, what has the Nawab done to them on election day?
He hit people.
What's that?
Did he hit more people during election day?
No, so what he did is he had soldiers stand guard over the electors for the opposition party, right? So they couldn't go cast their votes.
So he prevent people.
Yeah, in order to make sure that his party, his allies, get elected, and not a single vote from his region goes to the opposition party to prove his loyalty to the party in power. So, just as General Zulfikar is corrupt, that he's being paid off by smugglers, right? The Nawab here is corrupt because he's using force to ingratiate himself with the government, right? So even like, these, processes that are supposed to be democratic, right? In the name of progress, or of a particular group of people's idea of progress, right? Actual democratic ideals basically get kind of stomped on. And we can kind of see this sort of thing happening throughout the novel. We can even go back to the problems of Salim's Uncle Hanif, right? Do you remember why Uncle Hanif couldn't get his movies produced anymore? What the studios didn't like about the scripts he was writing.
Because they actually had kiss in it, instead of like in the whole concept of indirect kiss. That's kind of related to that, right? But it's not the actual issue. So like the problem was, so like the typical, even today, like, the typical Bombay movie, or the typical, I guess, Mumbai movie now, they still call it Bollywood from the old name Bombay. But the typical Bollywood movie is like a big kind of like extravaganza with lots of spectacle, singing, dancing, lots of quick action scenes. And Hanif starts writing these realistic plots about social problems. So no one wants to make his movies. So his refusal to continue to create illusions on screen leads to the studios refusing to make his films, and eventually to his suicide, right? Now, the last thing I really kind of wanted to cover here, and all of this connects up with the fact that Salim is hanging out now, the part of the novel we've got to, with street magicians
in the ghetto of Delhi. So there's a bit here that I want to point to, where it describes the magician's attitudes towards reality. Let's see. Okay, page 444. Right. It was the time of the afternoon called the Chaya, when the shadow of the tall red brick and marble Friday mosque fell across the higgledy shacks of the slum clustered at its feet. That slum whose ramshackle tin roofs created such a swelter of heat that it was insupportable to be inside the fragile shacks except during the Chaya at night. But now conjurers and contortionists and jugglers and fakirs had gathered in the shade around the solitary standpipe to greet the new arrival. I can feel, I cried, and then picture sing. Okay, Captain, tell us how it feels to be born again, falling like baby out of Parvati's basket. I could smell amazement on Picture Singh. He was clearly astounded by Parvati's trick, but like a true professional, would not dream of asking her how she had achieved it. In this way, Parvati the witch, who had used her limitless powers to spirit me to safety, escaped discovery. And also, because, as I later discovered, the ghetto of the magicians disbelieved with the absolute certainty of illusionists by trade in the possibility of magic. So all of the magicians are absolute materialists, right? Because they make their living, right, creating illusions to trick people. None of them believe in magic or fairy stories of any kind. Now, there's another way that the magicians hook back to Uncle Hanif, right, who refuses to make illusions anymore. Uncle Hanif hung out with members of the Communist Party, right, including his former brother-in-law, Nadir Khan, who was going by the name Qasim then. The magicians are also all communists. And I think that the absolute materialism of the magicians is a kind of joke reference to Marxism as a philosophy, right? So to give you a sense of what that means and how that works, right?
We talked about it a little bit.
Okay, in theory?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you know about Marxism as a philosophy?
I don't know much about it, because I know somebody in the React to the Past game is a Marxism.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was, and I don't want to connect it back to psychoanalysis, but it's like, psychoanalysis is complicated. It's like Marxism is slightly complicated too.
They're both complicated, yeah, but,
Yes.
but Marxism actually has little to do, at least directly, with psychoanalysis, right? So psychoanalysis tends to locate issues primarily in the individual, right? It's about like kind of reading the individual's personality problems. Marxism is more about trying to diagnose social ills. And it does so by arguing that everything is built on a base that is defined by the prevailing economic system within a culture, right? So when a Marxist talks about the base, what they're talking about is economic reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything built on top of that, a Marxist calls superstructure. So, religion, art, politics, literature, so on and so forth, right? This superstructure is always going to be shaped by the nature of the base, or it's always going to reflect the nature of that base. So, for example, let's take religion as an example. The primary economic system in Western Europe in the Middle Ages was called feudalism, right? Where the basic system is that the king owns all the land, and he parcels out portions of it to his supporters, who are then, dukes, and the dukes parcel out portions of their land to barons, who parcel out portions of their land to knights, who farm it with, basically, agrarian serfs, right, who have few to no rights and don't own any of the land, they just have to work it. So the Catholic Church, which is the primary religious institution of in Western Europe in the Middle Ages, has basically the same structure, right, where the Pope is responsible for the entire church, right, he's at the head of the entire church, and then beneath him are cardinals, who are all responsible for large geographic regions. Beneath them are bishops, who are responsible for smaller regions, like, say, an individual city. And beneath the bishops are parish priests, who are responsible for administering, a single church. And then beneath them are lay people who are just kind of expected to show up and pray and tithe, right? So, is that the freaking fire alarm again?
I would hope not. Because if I go down them stairs a third time today, I'm not coming back up.
Okay, it is not. Fortunately, it is not. But so you see how this works, or how a Marxist would say the religious organization, right, the cultural formation mirrors that economic base, right? And I think that's kind of what's going on with these Marxist magicians in Midnight's Children, right? That because they know that the superstructure is all just illusions, right? They're really only concerned with the base, with the economic system. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And the last illusion that I want to mention here, right, is Mustafa Aziz and Fly. Right? Uncle Mustafa's abbreviation for family is Fly, right? And so Salim comes to his uncle expecting, right, oh, this is my last living relative, right? They have to take me in, they'll take care of me, they'll get me a job, they'll support me. And how does that work out?
He got kicked out.
Yeah, they kick him out, right? And things are actually going to end up going worse for Salim in the next portion of the novel.
What? He get kicked out?
Well, they catch him with Parvati the witch in his bedroom.
Oh, okay.
But I think, they're probably only looking for an excuse anyway, right? So let's look at the description of Uncle Mustafa here on page 454, right? Mustafa, the family mediocrity, right? Droopy mustachioed, tall but stooped, an eternal number 2. My uncle Mustafa was not my uncle Hanif. He was the head of the family now, the only one of his generation to survive the Holocaust of 1965. But he gave me no help at all. I bearded him in his genealogy-filled study one bitter evening and explained, with proper solemnity and humble but resolute gestures, my historic mission to rescue the nation from her fate, right? Salim is also subject to illusions right now of greatness. But he sighed deeply and said, listen, Salim, what would you have me do? I keep you in my house, you eat my bread and do nothing. But that is all right, you are from my dead sister's house, I must look after. So stay, rest, get well in yourself, then let us see. You want a clerkship or so, maybe it can be fixed. But leave these dreams of God knows what. Our country is in safe hands. Already Indiraji is making radical reforms, land reforms, tax structures, education, birth control. You can leave it to her and her Sarkar. Patronizing me, Padma, as if I were a foolish child. Oh, the shame of it, the humiliating shame of being condescended to by dolts. So Mustafa has an overwhelming faith in authority, right? Whoever that authority happens to be. Right now it's Indira Gandhi, okay. Indira Gandhi's going to fix everything. However, if one of her rivals, say if Morarji Desai had been elected, the implication is that Uncle Mustafa would think that Morarji Desai is going to fix everything, right? So he just kind of reflexively bows to whoever is in authority, and it never gets him anywhere, right? He remains number 2 in the department basically forever. Right, page 450, right? My uncle Mustafa Aziz, whose once proudly waxed mustache had never recovered from the paralyzing dust storm of the destruction of Methwald's estate, had been passed over for the headship of his department no less than 47 times, and had at last found consolation for his inadequacies in thrashing his children and ranting nightly about how he was clearly the victim of anti-Muslim prejudice and a contradictory but absolute loyalty to the government of the day, and an obsession with genealogies, which was his only hobby and whose intensity was greater even than my father Ahmed Sinai's long ago desire to prove himself descended from Mughal emperors. In the first of these consolations, he was willingly joined by his wife, the half-Irani would-be socialite Sonra Nekrosravani, who had been driven certifiably insane by a life in which he had been required to begin being a chamcha, literally a spoon, but idiomatically a flatterer, to 47 separate and successive wives of number 1, whom she had previously alienated by her manner of colossal condescension when they had been the wives of number 3s. So, Mustafa and Sonia do not seem like very appealing people here, right? But so, we see, like, Mustafa also trying to reconcile this cognitive dissonance, right? That we see, like, we see these dissonant timelines, right? There's the historical timeline and the personal timeline that don't match up. There's here also, Mustafa Aziz is trying to reconcile his belief that the government is prejudiced against Muslims with his belief that everything the government does is good and right. And I think it's like Maya is kind of like constructed out of these impulses to try to reconcile things that can't be reconciled with each other, right? That these attempts to hold completely contradictory beliefs lead a lot of these characters away from truth. All right, so that's all I have for you today. Do you have any questions about anything? All right, well, let me give you the guide questions for next time. And then we're going to finish this up on Monday.
So, my presentation is not next week, but the week after.
What date does it say on the... the assignment sheet.
Let me see. KK, the 10th through the 11th, you have Roy twice.
Let's see. Oh, those aren't the presentation dates, those are just when I want you to come and meet with me.
Oh, then.
So, yeah, so let's see, so your actual presentation date is the 12th.
Oh, that's next week.
Yeah.